Today's show is brought to you by two of our favorite organizations, the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh and the Allegheny County Library Association. September marks 10 years of their joint program, Love Your Library. It's really a county-wide celebration where your donation during the month of September will be partially matched and helps keep essential services going. So everything from books and materials to facility improvements and programs for all. If you use the library system, show your love and donate now at loveyourlibrary.org. CityCast Pittsburgh is supported today by the Heinz History Center and their newest exhibition, Pittsburgh's Hidden History. It is a cornucopia of curiosity, a magical menagerie of memory, and a little bit of this and that. There are flowery couches, relics from Kennywood, even a collection of shivs. If you listen to this show a lot, you know we are loving this. It is truly mind-boggling to see how the curators brought together such a wide range of rarely seen artifacts to tell Pittsburgh stories like never before. To buy your tickets and learn more, visit HeinzHistoryCenter.org. Today on CityCast Pittsburgh. When I first moved here over a decade ago, a lot of people I knew were still talking about the G20 summit back in 2009, in part because of the National Guard. They were called in, there were protests, there were overreactions. I need more than two hands to count how many people I knew who got pepper sprayed or tear gassed or both that weekend. Having soldiers deployed to your town is a weird thing to experience. So if you remember that, those two bizarre days in Pittsburgh, you might have some idea what people have been dealing with in LA and in DC this summer. Federalized troops taken to the streets to secure the people and allegedly deal with crime. As President Trump has been talking more and more about going into U.S. cities, calling in the National Guard, we thought it might be worth talking about exactly what that means, what the Guard is allowed to do, what the law says, and the likelihood that Pittsburgh makes it to the top of Trump's list. It's Tuesday, September 16th. I'm Megan Harris, and here's what Pittsburgh's talking about. I'm with CityCast Pittsburgh executive producer Mallory Falk. Hello, welcome. Are you ready to talk about the U.S. military?
It is not a thing I thought we would be doing on CityCast Pittsburgh, but it has suddenly become very relevant.
Yeah, we're going to start with what's been going on. If you've avoided this stuff, if it's not in your feed, if you're looking for the need to knows, we wanted to share with you a little bit of background about what's been happening nationally and how it relates to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, so in case you missed it, troops entered Los Angeles in June and Washington, D.C. last month in August. In L.A., this was in response to protests against ICE and immigration raids. And in D.C., Trump said he was deploying troops to address a crime emergency, quote unquote.
Yeah. And then last week, Trump suggested that other cities could be next. First on the list was Chicago. He posted it to his social media platform, Truth Social, that the city was, quote, about to find out why it's called the Department of War. Brief aside here, by the way, the president recently signed an executive order renaming the Department of Defense the Department of War. That's not official unless Congress makes it so. But anyway, that's in the backdrop. Trump was later asked about that post and says, "We are not going to war. We're going to clean up our cities. We're going to clean them up so they don't kill 5 people every weekend. That's not war. That's common sense," end quote.
So while all this is going on, as Trump is name-dropping Chicago, a federal judge ruled that these actions are unconstitutional. That was Tuesday, and by Wednesday, the Trump administration had appealed that decision.
And then, of course, on Friday, he says, just kidding, not sending troops to Chicago. We're going to send them to Memphis instead. They said Memphis is, quote, deeply troubled, and the National Guard is going to address crime there. Although I think it's really important to underscore here, crime is down in every major category in Memphis right now, year over year. That's according to a report that just came out a few days before Trump's announcement. For what it's worth, that was my first job. I went to undergrad in Memphis. I was a crime reporter for the first 3 years of my career. I lived and breathed this stuff. And when I tell you that Memphis knows its own stuff, I think it's what every city's been talking about here. We know how to take care of ourselves. We do not need federal help.
Yeah. And I mean, that's what leadership in Memphis and in a lot of these cities have been saying. Mm-hmm. This is not like welcome attention on them. You know, in the meantime, Trump is like mentioning or hinting at more cities. As of this recording, we've heard or seen reporting about Trump potentially sending National Guard troops to Baltimore, Boston, New Orleans, Portland. The list may have changed by the time you hear this show because it is rapidly changing.
And notably missing from that list, of course, are cities in Pennsylvania. So far, knock on wood, not speaking that into existence. The president that we know of has not mentioned publicly Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, but there is a lot of talk about this. I think like every major city leader is thinking about it, at least in the background. So we figured we would run through a few of the reasons why he might consider coming here, just so we're all aware.
Yeah. So, you know, first of all, part of why this is surfacing right now is that our governor, Josh Shapiro, got asked about this last week after an event in Philly. A reporter asked him, you know, this hypothetical, what happens if the National Guard comes to a city in Pennsylvania? Here is what Shapiro said.
I think what the president's doing is wrong. I think what the president's doing injects chaos in communities. And I can tell you that we are prepared should he decide to try that here in Philly.
What does that mean?
I'm not going to get into the specifics. I can tell you we are prepared. And let me round it out. It's not just Philly. We're prepared should they try to deploy the National Guard against my will in any community across Pennsylvania.
Which, like, I'm glad that our governor is willing to say something like that and, like, stand strong, but also, like, kind of sounds like a dare. Like, why, Josh? Why poke the big orange bear?
I mean, to be fair to him, a reporter specifically asked him about it. I'm not sure what he could have or should have said in response.
Yeah. Anyway, for what it's worth, Shapiro went on to say that violent crime is down. I presume that he means in Philly. He cited some specific statistics, but since that's where he was speaking, it does stand to reason. And that Pennsylvania has spent millions on law enforcement strategies all over the state, lots of community-driven initiatives to work on this stuff ourselves, just like we were saying, that we don't need federal troops coming in to try to undermine what's been happening on a local level.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, Shapiro later wrote on X, anyone who tries to undermine Pennsylvanians' fundamental freedoms will have to go through me, whether that's a predatory corporation or the president of the United States. So I guess, Megan, yeah, like he had to respond to the reporter, but you could see this tweet as a little bit of poking the bear there.
Yeah. For what it's worth, I checked in with Vic Volchek, the legal director for the Pennsylvania office of the ACLU, just about like how they're monitoring this. He said that he hasn't seen any, you know, quote unquote, clear indication that an action is likely in Pennsylvania, at least not yet. But he does reckon that if it happened, if the National Guard came to Pennsylvania, it would be in Philadelphia, not in Pittsburgh. That whoever's making this list, presuming there's a list somewhere, Philly is probably in their top 10, and that whatever provocation does or does not come to bear in any city, that it just probably won't take much to like create a reason, right? Like, quote, I have little doubt that they will weaponize even the tiniest conflagration to justify sending in troops, end quote.
Yeah, and I feel like that's also why, even if we don't suspect that Pittsburgh is on any kind of top 10 list, it's important for us to know about this, because my sense is anything happening at any moment in any city could trigger this kind of response.
Yeah. So anyway, the ACLU is watching all of this just like the rest of us. Chris Borick, the political scientist and director of Muhlenberg College's Institute of Public Opinion, told one outlet that Shapiro himself also could be part of Pennsylvania's problem, like one of the things that is raising maybe Philadelphia or Pittsburgh on whatever list this could be. Because until this weekend, for example, it seems to have been part of Trump's brand to pick on Democratic strongholds with possible presidential contenders.
Which, of course, Shapiro is one.
Exactly. So LA hit at California Governor Gavin Newsom, the threats about Chicago, which may or may not come to bear, that hits Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. And then Shapiro, we know he's high on everybody's list. Like we joke about it on this show, but like he was the top of Kamala Harris's list last year for VP. Like we know he's thinking about what's next.
Yes, he does seem to be positioning himself for a presidential run. At the very least, a lot of people are talking about him that way.
I think he likes it that way. But, to this point about like presidential contenders, Memphis would buck that trend. So it's a blue city in an extremely red state. Tennessee Governor Bill Lee has been in lockstep with Texas, Florida, Trump himself over the last few years. But the reporting I've seen said that Lee was notably shocked when he realized that a Tennessee city was suddenly next on the list. For what it's worth, there's also a local theory that Memphis was targeted because of business ties. So a billionaire with business in Memphis is a buddy of Trump's. Like there's all these photos of them together in the Oval Office. And there's been a bunch of great reporting about that in like one of Memphis's local papers. So they're really doing the work trying to figure out why in the heck Memphis is suddenly on the top of this list.
Yeah. And I mean, I've seen some reporting that sort of was pointing out the hypocrisy of like the cities that Trump is sending troops to or talking about sending troops to, their murder rates at least are much lower than some of these other cities that weren't on his list, and including Memphis. But I don't imagine like Trump makes decisions based on what looks hypocritical or not. So, when he made this announcement about Memphis, he said that he would have preferred going to Chicago, but the city was too hostile with professional agitators. And so I wonder if there's maybe a strategy shift here. Like the AP noted that between sending troops to Memphis, threatening to send them to New Orleans, he could be turning his attention to Democratic cities in Republican-led states where the governor is supporting deployment. Also worth noting that these are not just Democratic cities, but majority Black cities that he has his attention on.
We are coming at you today thanks to FA Climbing and Fitness in Pittsburgh. It's over in Station Square on the south side, a premier indoor climbing facility with a lot of space, huge pads to fall on, and a really nice free weight area, plus the nicest staff you can imagine. Whether you have been sending since the days of the Stone Masters or it's literally your first time laying eyes on a climbing shoe, FA Climbing and Fitness in Pittsburgh is here to help. They will show you how to safely fall. They'll give you a nice tour. They have color-coded routes at all ability levels, so you're sure to get a challenge no matter where you're at. And you can also do yoga, try out the gym, sit on the couch and watch the river go by. It's all included in your day pass or membership, which, by the way, if you are hearing this, then you qualify for a BOGO deal. CityCast listeners can buy one day pass and get one free. If you already have a membership, just share it with a friend. Rental gear is all included, plus 2 hours of free parking, and they have student and family passes too. Trust, the climbing community is amazing. You don't have to be good. You just have to be down for a good time. Learn more and get your BOGO passes at faclimbing.com/citycast. Let's climb Pittsburgh. This episode of CityCast Pittsburgh is supported in part by City Theater Company. This fall, they are putting on a play called Another Kind of Silence, written by L.M. Feldman. And if you're a theater aficionado, this one you probably should miss. It's one of the most ambitious productions in city theater history. The play is all about Chap and Evan, who meet each other in sunny Athens, and they fall in love. But the story is not simple because both of these women are already in other relationships. Another Kind of Silence is a journey of language, desire, dreaming. You don't want to miss the bilingual and bicultural world premiere in English and American Sign Language, and you'll leave feeling inspired and hopefully heartened by the show's wanderlust and wonder. It runs from September 20th to October 12th. You can get your tickets at citytheatercompany.com. So while we wait to see what comes next here in Pittsburgh or over in Philly, we wanted to run through the basics of how the National Guard actually works. We pulled some of this from our wonderful colleague, Emily Mack at CityCast Chicago.
Yes, major props to Emily. I think the first question, the most basic one, is just what is the National Guard? It is a part-time military force, and it serves two different authorities. So first off, they respond to domestic emergencies like natural disasters. You'll see them arrive after a big hurricane or flood, something like that. Mm-hmm. And that is at the request of governors. A governor makes the call to bring in the National Guard to kind of help with disaster response. But members of the National Guard also serve as a reserve component of the U.S. Army and the U.S. Air Force. So they can get called up for overseas combat, and it's Congress and the Department of Defense that decides that. So there's both like a state authority overseeing them and also a federal authority.
Which also gets into like how they get paid and how long they are a place and what they do while they're there. And so a teeny bit of history here, and we'll try to focus it on the local. So the whole concept of the National Guard was first established in the colonies. So well before the American Revolution. Massachusetts is credited as establishing the first one in 1636. That did make me laugh just a little bit because I feel like it's applying a modern like thing to an old thing that doesn't necessarily match one-to-one, but hey. The Guard itself was the country's first military institution of any kind, but that name, National Guard, came way later.
Yeah, and so Pennsylvania's version of the National Guard goes all the way back to 1747, unsurprisingly connected to Philly and Ben Franklin. He created something called the Associators. They were renamed a militia a few years later, and then by 1870, they were officially named the National Guard of Pennsylvania.
And so today, our National Guard, again, under the auspices of our governor, is one of the largest and most deployed in the nation because states can send their Guard troops to other places to help out with various things. Each state does maintain its own. And there's an Army National Guard and an Air National Guard. If you've ever covered or read anything about the military, you know that some of this stuff can be a little bit confusing. But here in Pennsylvania, there are bases all over for both divisions. The closest one to Pittsburgh is the 171st Air Refueling Wing out at Pittsburgh International Airport. They've had a presence at some Pittsburgh airport in some form since 1948.
Yeah, and so the folks out at the airport, they do a lot of different things, but their main role, I did not know this, was fascinated to learn, is they refuel aircraft while it is still in flight so that planes don't need to land here. They've got a bunch of specialized equipment for it, and it allows our planes, including bombers and fighters, to get more mileage, wherever they're going.
Yeah. And so they've got like 1,400 people, give or take, that work there either full time or part time, which is why I think like if any kind of National Guard troop were to deploy in the city of Pittsburgh, it does not make sense that the 171st would be part of it because they have such specialized skills that are used very specific ways. Like standing around on our bridges is like not a good use of these people's time.
Yes. And so, typically, like we said, it's like the state's governor who's making the call to deploy the National Guard. But during emergencies, troops can get federalized, which means instead of reporting to the governor, they report to the president, which brings us to what's happening right now.
Yes, that brings us to the Posse Comitatus Act. So if you've probably heard this get talked about at least a little bit, but basically it bars federal military troops from participating in civilian law enforcement without congressional approval. So like the president can federalize, but if Congress doesn't approve it, then they're not allowed to do like basic law enforcement actions. So this only relates to the National Guard when they have been federalized.
Which happened earlier this summer. So, President Trump federalized California's National Guard troops. He deployed 4,000 of them to Los Angeles. Again, this was in response to protests against ICE and immigration enforcement actions there.
And against the wishes of the governor, Gavin Newsom.
Exactly. And so when Trump did that, this was the first time since 1965 when a president federalized the National Guard, deployed the National Guard without support and cooperation from the state's governor.
And one could argue that one was a good thing because that was to protect people marching from Selma to Montgomery during the civil rights movement. That was in Alabama when Governor George Wallace didn't want the Guard there to protect protesters, people marching, and President Lyndon Johnson sent them anyway.
Yeah, and actually, like during the civil rights era, National Guard troops were federalized a fair number of times, including like they were sent to protect children who were integrating schools. So there was this era when a lot of what the National Guard was being sent in to do was to protect people who were fighting for civil rights. They've been federalized for other reasons before and since, but that was a period when that was like a huge role they were serving.
Which is sort of wild when you consider the history of the Posse Comitatus Act in general, because like it was passed after the Civil War when Southern lawmakers were upset that the Army was deploying to their states, and it like helped usher in Jim Crow, which is what the Civil Rights era was trying to roll back. Like, talk about evolution.
Yeah, there is a very long history there. Mm-hmm. But anyway, bringing us back to the present. To
California.
Yes. With this deployment to LA, a judge ruled that it actually violates this act we're talking about, the Posse Comitatus Act. Because while the National Guard was there, they performed law enforcement duties that are prohibited for members of the military.
Yeah, and I think a note on this too, a judge says it shouldn't have happened, but it doesn't prevent it from happening in other places, right? So it's super specific to the actions in LA only, and only after the Guard was deployed there, meaning it's a problem because of what they did while they were there. They could have been deployed legally, but when they got there, like they clearly weren't needed and just sort of repeated what law enforcement would normally be doing, like civilian law enforcement, and could have done on their own. So that's the part that became the problem.
Right, which makes it different than the deployment in D.C. Also, what's different there is like the district doesn't have a governor. It's not a state. It only has a mayor. Many people are protesting to change this, but that's where it stands right now. So Trump actually controls D.C.'s National Guard.
And governors from 6 other states sent in their troops to D.C. too, which complicates the matter, notably Tennessee Governor Bill Lee. CityCast Pittsburgh is brought to you today thanks to the Frick Pittsburgh Museum and Gardens and a new award-winning tour of their historic home, Clayton. It's called Gilded, Not Golden, I Have Taken It, and it's a fresh perspective about the Frick family, all centered on a very big year here in Pittsburgh history. So 1892, the Homestead strikes, the Fricks had a little home construction project going. Someone attacked Henry Clay Frick, and all of this while he and his wife are mourning the death of their child. You'll also learn about Pittsburgh's Millionaires Row and exactly what it took for Frick to get there. He was a millionaire by the age of 30. And you'll see the breakfast room, aka the poker table, where at least a time or two, most of the world's wealth was literally concentrated into a single dining room. History is complicated and this home is special. That's what the Frick wants to share with you. The Frick's Gilded, Not Golden tours of Clayton run Tuesdays through Sundays from 10:15 a.m. through 3 p.m. Get your tickets and learn more at thefrickpittsburgh.org. So what can the National Guard do? If they can't perform these like basic law enforcement duties, what are they allowed to do? So under the Posse Comitatus Act, they cannot make arrests. But the Department of Defense or the Department of War claims exceptions to the law. So if Trump invokes this other thing called the Insurrection Act, that means that Posse Comitatus gets suspended and federal troops can directly perform law enforcement actions. So far as of this recording, that has not happened. And the Insurrection Act itself is like a flawed document. Critics say it's dangerously vague and in need of reform.
And the last time this act got invoked was back in 1992. George H.W. Bush invoked it to federalize California National Guard troops during the LA riots after LAPD officers beat Rodney King. So this has happened in somewhat recent history. It's also an idea that's been floated during both of Trump's terms. One thing that I think is worth noting here is that Trump did not talk about federalizing the National Guard when there was an actual insurrection in our country, during January 6th.
Correct. So back to what they can and can't do. Even if they can't arrest people, it seems like detainments are maybe a gray area. So a senior military official leading the LA deployment said that troops there could not arrest people, but they could detain civilians until law enforcement arrived. But that recent court ruling that we talked about earlier, it said that troops could not be used for any kind of regular law enforcement activity. So arrests, apprehension, searches, seizures, security patrols, traffic control, crowd control, riot control, even things like evidence collection or interrogation. They're not supposed to be doing any of that.
Yeah. And then something I'm sure is on top of everyone's mind, use of force. So technically, these reservists, these National Guard members, they should not be able to hit or hurt anyone that they're called on to secure. They're only supposed to use force to protect themselves or protect other people from immediate danger, like, stopping a violent act or to protect critical military operations. But I wonder how broadly that might be interpreted.
Yeah. So to that end, let's talk about what they are actually doing in the places that they have been deployed. So in LA, they've been assisting ICE and doing regular cop things, which is why this judge's ruling is now coming into play.
In DC, there's kind of been a wide range. They have helped clear nearly 50 homeless encampments, but then they've also been doing things like raking leaves and picking up garbage and laying mulch and reportedly just standing around, quote unquote.
The DC guys look bored. They just look bored.
I mean, in some ways, I'm kind of glad that they're just laying mulch. I'd rather them that than be out doing things that are really harmful or questionable.
True. Yeah.
You know, for what it's worth, the Department of Defense says that the National Guard could be used to protect federal property. That was part of the justification for sending them to LA during the immigration protests.
Which is basically all of DC. So you're right, Mallory. Maybe mulch is a better use of their time.
But, you know, if they were to come to Pittsburgh, there is a lot of federal property here. We've got, you know, the federal courthouse downtown, the FBI field office in the South Side, the offices for the Social Security Administration, the VA campuses. There's a lot of sites here.
Yeah, actually, one on the list that I was sort of surprised about was Point State Park, which is a state park, but it includes federally recognized historic landmarks like the Fort Pitt Blockhouse. So technically, it would qualify too.
So, you know, right now it is unclear what, if any, actions might happen in Pennsylvania, and that even if Pennsylvania is on the list, Pittsburgh probably isn't. Though, again, like if something happened here, I think that could change really quickly. So it's important to just at least understand how all of this stuff works.
Yeah, or, you know, just take a refresher. We also have all of this if you are a reading person on our website, too. You can read about it at pittsburgh.citycast.fm. Share it around. We just want to make sure that folks are aware of this and thinking about it. It's not happening here, but it could. And it's always important to know that kind of thing. We will leave you with this message from Governor Pritzker in Illinois. I think it's something to keep in mind as all of this plays out here and elsewhere.
The Trump plan is to use any excuse to deploy armed military personnel to Chicago. If someone flings a sandwich at an ICE agent, Trump will try and go on TV and declare an emergency in Chicago. I'm imploring everyone, if and when that happens, do not take the bait.
That is all for today here on CityCast Pittsburgh. You can support us by becoming a CityCast Pittsburgh neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. We will be back tomorrow with more news from around the city. We'll talk to you soon. I can't say this word and I practiced. Conflagration.